A Great Argead Saga Alexein, Alexander the Great. Volume 1, Telesias, The War Dance. By Macaulay. A new episode every single day. Episode 06, Gilded Cage. The rhythmic, subterranean thrum of the Telesias war dance, amplified and distorted by the immense stone foundations of the palace, vibrated upward through the flagstones of the secluded courtyard. It felt like a phantom heartbeat rattling the bones. Here, buried deep within the inner architecture of Pella, a bit away from the roaring, alcohol-soaked clamor of the grand hall, the air was sharp, cool, and thick, with the cloying scent of damp masonry and night-blooming jasmine. Philip stood paralyzed. Having been driven from the threshold of the great hall by the bruising, iron-fingered grip of the elder General Italis, his small frame was rigid, his ears straining against the heavy air. Across the compound, a sudden, deafening roar of celebratory cheer erupted from the main banquet, the collective. Predatory shout of hundreds of carousing lowland barons that sounded less like a festival and more like a war cry. In this beautiful, claustrophobic sanctuary, Philip found himself surrounded by ghosts of a different sort. His three older half-brothers, Archelaus, 17, Argead, 15, and Menelaus, 12. Though they were all merely adolescents, their physical presence within the courtyard served as a silent, suffocating monument to the fractured, hydra-headed nature of the Argead house. They did not play. They sat like statues carved from resentment. Near the shadowed arcade, a few children of the visiting Thessalian nobles huddled together. Among them was Philina, the daughter of Lord Menas of Larissa. Born into the high-stakes politics of the Peneus Valley, she had been raised not as a child, but as an unspoken treaty. Her early years had been a blurred rotation of diplomatic missions, learning the subtle art of the courtly knot and the calculated silence that kept her family's cavalry influence supreme. Her father, Menas, had refined her into a living relic of their house's prestige. She was the prized heir of a clan that believed itself superior to the barbarian kings of the north, even as they were forced to offer her up as a guest of state. Now she sat beside Areopus, a younger girl from the house of Fairy, who nervously pleated the hem of her gown. They were playing a quiet, joyless game of knucklebones, their movements frantic and hushed, as if they feared the noise of their own laughter would draw the attention of the dark-faced princes nearby. The children, too, felt the encroaching weight of the gilded cage. They were the living currency of their father's alliances, brought to Pella to witness the power of the Argead throne, yet trapped in the silence of the courtyard, while the adults drank to war. Every time the ground shook with the rhythmic stomping of the Telesias dancers from the halls below, Philina would freeze, her hand hovering over the bones, waiting to see if the palace foundations would hold, or if the entire gilded structure was about to buckle under the weight of the men inside. Philip watched them from the shadows, an outsider in his own home, observing the children of his father's allies as they waited, much like him, for the night to end. The stone corridor was cool, smelling of damp earth and distant, fading incense, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the banquet hall. Philip had only just slipped into the shadows when a flurry of silk and frantic whispers intercepted him. It was Philina, her eyes bright with the feverish, wide-eyed ambition that only those who haven't yet felt the weight of a blade at their throat could possess. She caught his sleeve, pulling him into the alcove where the torchlight barely reached. "Philip, did you see the glitter of the dais? The way the light caught the gold?" She didn't wait for an answer, her voice bubbling over with the heady, girlish dreams of a future that felt as solid to her as the floor beneath their feet. "I have been thinking, while the tutors droned on about lineage and poetry. I'm nearly at the age. The messengers from the southern houses, they all whisper the same thing. They talk of marriage alliances, of binding the nobility to the Argead name. Imagine it! A royal wedding, a crown upon my brow, a destiny that lifts me above this gray stone life." Philip looked at her, his expression unreadable. To him, her words were the innocent, airy nonsense of a girl who had spent too many afternoons reading tales of legendary queens. He did not yet fully grasp the jagged geometry of the life they led, that girls of their station were not people, but carved ivory pieces on a board, moved by the cold hands of patriarchs to secure borders or neutralize rivals. He thought of his elder sister, Eurino, recently bartered away to Ptolemy of Aloros in a desperate, brittle attempt to buy his loyalty. He didn't have the heart to tell her that her dream was already a transaction waiting to be cleared in some dark cabinet. you think of crowns, Philip said, his voice quiet, almost detached. If you wish for a crown, Felina, why set your sights on a minor lord? If you are to be a piece in this game, aim for the highest reach of the board. Felina blinked, her breath catching. The highest, you mean the king? Alexander, Philip replied, his gaze flickering back toward the main hall, where his brother's jagged laugh still echoed. He already holds a hand in marriage, but in this world, such things are fragile. A king is a predator. He consumes alliances as he consumes wine. He will have a second wife, a third, as many as the state requires to keep the wolves from the door. And if he falls, he paused, his mind flashing to the knives in the dark, the shifting loyalties, the lincestions waiting in the wings. If the path shifts, there is Perdiccas. He is the shadow of the throne, and shadows are often the ones who eventually claim the light. He looked at her, seeing the way she clung to the idea, her mind already painting herself in the colors of a queen. He was the last son, the one tucked away in the periphery, the one who didn't even factor into the grand calculations of the moment. He was no one, and she was currently chasing a ghost of a life that would likely end in a political cage. You are too young for such heavy thoughts, Philip said, his tone softening with a sudden, weary cynicism beyond his 14 years. He gently unlatched her hand from his arm. Dream of other things for a while, Felina. Wait until you reach the proper age to be sent off. Let the world come to you rather than trying to walk into its teeth. He turned and slipped back into the darkness of the corridor, leaving her bathed in the flickering torchlight, oblivious to the fact that the palace around her was being dismantled, and that the marriage bed she coveted might soon become a blood-soaked pedestal. Deeper in the shadows sat Gygaea, the secondary queen of the late Amyntas III, composed and motionless on the edge of a carved marble fountain. The rhythmic splashing of the water did nothing to dampen the tension simmering in the courtyard. Her dark, unblinking eyes methodically tracked every movement of her sons. Though Gygaea was a noblewoman of the unblemished lowland aristocracy, her status remained inextricably lower than that of the principal queen, the Lincestian tiger Eurydice. This disparity drew a sharp, invisible boundary line through the palace gardens. Gygaea's sons were the reserve lineage, ever-present watchful shadows to the direct line of succession. With their ages overlapping so perfectly with those of Alexander II, Perdiccas, and Philip, the very air in the garden felt heavy, saturated with the unspoken metrics of dynastic competition, the threat of hidden daggers and the permanent lurking specter of civil war. Philip turned toward Gygaea, his dark eyes sharp with a desperate youthful yearning that masterfully masked a cold, rapidly expanding dread. I want to go back to the festival, second mother, he urged, pitching his voice to carry the petulant, cracking treble of a boy denied a toy. I told General Italus that I belong at the high tables, but he threw me from the doors. Why must we stay out here in the dark? Mother Eurydice is inside, and so are my brothers, Alexander and Perdiccas. The whole kingdom toasts the vanguard, yet we are cast out like dogs. He did not mention the true reason for his suffocating urgency, the lingering icy weight of young Attilus's whisper warning him that the first shadow was already returning for a second attempt. His eyes drifted toward the heavy oak entrance. The massive timbers were already barred from within, cutting off the chamber, but it offered no comfort. The world outside felt suddenly, dangerously out of reach, leaving them trapped in the dark with whatever was coming. Gygaea did not look up. She fixed her gaze on the black, glassy surface of the fountain water, her fingers lightly trailing over the cold marble rim. Because their place is in the main hall, Philip. It is the heavy, historical duty of the eldest branches to navigate the unmixed wine and the predatory ambitions of men. It is not a place for a child. Not just yet. Her voice carried the smooth, unyielding finality of an iron gate, the tone of a woman who had survived 30 years of bedchamber treachery and dynastic purges. Let the servants fetch more spiced honey cakes from the lower kitchens. We will have our own feast here, where the air is clean. Philip scuffed the lip of his leather sandal against the paving stones, a cold, hard knot tightening in his intestines. He looked at Gygaea's serene, flawless profile and felt a sudden, terrifying suspicion bloom in his chest. Does she know? He wondered, his mind racing through the political geometry. Is she sitting here in this pristine quiet because she knows the wine in the grand hall will soon be mixed with Argead blood? Is this courtyard a sanctuary or an alibi? But King Alexander is barely older than Perdiccas, and I am not much younger than Menelaus. Philip countered, his voice trembling with a calculated show of boyish frustration. They are allowed at the hearths because they are princes of the blood. And so am I. Is that not the law of the Argeads? At the edge of the terrace, a small, highly polished river stone slipped from the nervous, sweating fingers of 12-year-old Menelaus, clattering softly against the marble floor. The sound was like a snapping bone in the quiet garden. Philip swung his hand out, gesturing aggressively toward his 3 half-brothers. Are they not also of the royal line? Why do we hide them away like dynamic state secrets while the lowland barons drink themselves blind? Archelaus muttered a bitter, venomous curse under his breath, his eyes flashing with a dangerous, suppressed resentment as he glared at the back of Philip's head. He was 17, the same age as Prince Perdiccas, yet he was treated as an irrelevance, a spare part waiting in the dark. Gygaea finally turned her head, her gaze locking onto Philip's eyes. Her expression held a steely, deeply calculated weariness that stripped away the mask of the doting secondary mother. The royal line, she repeated, her voice dropping to a low, melodic whisper that barely carried over the soft splashing of the fountain. For a fleeting second, the mask of the stoic queen fractured, and her eyes drifted to the dark sky, tracking memories Philip could not possibly see. She remembered the long, agonizing decades beside her late husband, King Amyntas III. She remembered the relentless, exhausting violence he had to unleash just to anchor his boots to the throne, the suffocating weight of a life spent worrying if dawn would bring an assassin or an army. It was a persistent, wearing terror, not just for his own skin, but for what would happen to her boys, and yes, even to his first queen, Eurydice, and her sons. If an outsider of non-royal blood ever successfully shattered the Argead line, if the dynasty fell, they would all be slaughtered in their beds to clear the ledger. Her gaze snapped back to Philip, cold and sharp as chipped flint. It is a treacherous, bloody path, my dear Philip. It is a tree with many branches, and in Macedonia, many of those branches are systematically pruned with a blade before they can ever bear fruit. Your mother and her sons must be seen tonight. They must loudly affirm their place at the absolute center of the world because their very survival demands it. They must prove they are too strong to be cut down. She paused, letting her words settle into the damp stone with a terrifying, subtle emphasis. But sometimes, true protection is found not in the blinding glare of the spotlight, but in the deep, quiet shadows of the terrace, Gygaea murmured, her voice carrying the weight of a seasoned survivalist. Let the revelry consume those who choose to be consumed. You are all safe here, tucked away from the wind. Now, let the slave fetch us fresh figs and pomegranates. This is a special night for you boys. Enjoy the quiet while the gods grant it. It was an absolute, harrowing truth. In Pella, betting your life to sit atop the throne meant you had to remain permanently visible, constantly projecting power, just to survive the next sunset. For Gygaea, surviving in the dim periphery, basking in just enough light to avoid the deep Persian shadows, made life slightly more bearable, but it offered no guarantees. The dynastic balance could fracture at any given micro-negative second, and never more so than at this exact moment. The Argead royal house and its sycophantic court were hanging by a thread over a pit of systemic corruption and bankruptcy. The young King Alexander II, driven by a desperate, reckless ambition to venture far to the south and seize the Thessalian tyrant, had sparked an international firestorm. His southern campaign had roused the civilized titan of Greece, drawing the cold, punitive eye of Thebes directly toward Pella. Seeing this vulnerability, the predatory nations surrounding Macedonia's borders were already rising, sharpening their iron, and waiting for the slightest tremor to invade and rip the land to pieces. The entire geopolitical dynamic was terrifyingly fragile. If the principal queen's lineage fell, the collateral damage would wash over the entire palace. As a secondary queen, Gygaea had to look at this burning horizon and constantly calculate how she and her 3 sons could survive the fallout. In the midst of such a suffocating, hypervolatile situation, Philip looked at her serene face and wondered, is she merely hiding from the storm, or is she the one who orchestrated the winds to throw over the young king? Philip nodded slowly, a knowing, ancient glint flashing across his young eyes, a micro-expression that Gygaea's sharp eyes did not miss. Philip made his choice. He decided to say nothing to Gygaea or his half-brothers. If she was plotting, or even an implicit piece of the conspiracy, revealing his hand would be fatal, and logically it made little sense for her to strike yet. She might gain some temporary leverage from a usurper, but with both Perdiccas and himself still standing in the line of succession, she would still have too many branches left to prune. It was a long, bloody way to go. He realized that if a slaughter was coming, his only weapon was his perceived innocence. By masterfully playing the role of the frustrated youngest son, pouting over a missed festival, he remained completely invisible to those who would seek to eliminate him. He scuffed his leather sandal against the stone floor again, feigning boyish irritation, but beneath the tantrum his ears were tuned to the wind. He was no longer listening for the joy of the music. He was listening for the frantic rhythm of the Telesias to break. Yet, as he watched Gygaea's hands resting perfectly still, almost unnaturally relaxed in her silk lap, Philip's nascent understanding gave way to a frantic, hyper-accelerated battlefield of intuition and logic. She was too calm. In Pella, silence was rarely peaceful. It was a shield used to mask the drawing of steel. But Philip was too young, his life too brief, to truly comprehend the hidden architecture of a life like Gygaea's. As the secondary wife, hailing from a pure, unblemished Macedonian noble house, she had successfully borne 3 healthy sons. In the xenophobic eyes of the traditional lowland aristocracy, her boys possessed a thicker, truer Macedonian heritage than the half-blood princes born to Eurydice, whose veins carried the regional stain of an Illyrian princess. Because the late King Amyntas III had married Eurydice solely to secure the volatile northern borders, the first queen had occupied a higher political altitude. But was Eurydice's life truly better than Gygaea's? This quiet terrace, this comfortable periphery, was the absolute highest political summit Gygaea could ever climb. Unless by some miraculous, catastrophic twist of fate, all 3 of Eurydice's sons died off sequentially. It was a ridiculous, bloody dream. And the mere thought of such a future made Gygaea wonder, would it even be worth it? To become the first queen meant dragging her pure-blooded sons out of the quiet shadows and shoving them directly into the blinding, merciless spotlight of geopolitical ambition, exposing their throats to any and every threat. Was she supposed to be more aggressive, more fiercely ambitious? Was challenging the dominant Argead lineage her true purpose? To compete with Eurydice was a necessity, yes. One had to maintain enough visibility to keep from being entirely swallowed by the first queen's shadow, but to desperately sprint, rush, and cross the winning line to seize the crown? It was utterly exhausting. Gygaea had long since concluded that the summit was a trap. At the top of that ladder, nothing awaited but an endless, escalating cycle of treacherous challenges. To possess just enough high status to live in luxury, tucked away from the wind, was a far better life than the relentless, tightrope survival act Eurydice had to navigate every single day. Philip stared at her, trying to read the cipher of her stillness, entirely unaware that the woman he suspected of orchestrating a coup was actually thanking the gods for the safety of her obscurity. To her, he was likely an afterthought, or perhaps if the daggers inside successfully found Alexander's heart, he was already her hostage, trapped behind barred doors with her 3 grown sons. He opened his mouth, the name Ptolemy rising like a bubble of poison from his throat, but the word caught on his tongue. He swallowed it down, his throat dry. If he asked about the region and she was part of the plot, he would instantly reveal himself to her as an intelligent threat that needed to be neutralized. If he asked, and she truly knew nothing, he was merely a paranoid, hysterical child. In that sharp, suffocating moment of silence, beneath the cold autumn stars of Macedonia, the true education of Philip II began. The real lessons of sovereign statecraft started long before one ever stepped onto the blood-slick steps of the royal dais, and sometimes they were taught in whispers by your greatest rival. Information was the only currency worth holding in Pella, and giving it away for free was a self-signed death warrant. Inside the hall, the flutes reached a mad, breathless scream. Outside, Philip waited for the scream to become human. To be continued in episode 07, Second Shadow Falls. Alexein, A Great Argead Saga Volume 1. Telesias, The War Dance. A new episode every single day. We are dropping a new episode every day until the epic conclusion of Volume 1. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 5 to 15-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, perfect for your daily plunge into antiquity. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full saga now. Bookmark Volume 1, Telesias playlist. Bookmark Volume 1, Divine Oracle Playlist. Subscribe to follow the rise of the Argead dynasty. Thumbs up to help push our vanguard through the algorithm's gauntlet. Comment below. Is Gygaea using this quiet courtyard to protect her sons from the coming storm, or has she already turned this sanctuary into a trap for young Philip? Let us know your theories below.